Aloha. Welcome to American Issues Take One. I'm Tim Apicella, your host, and today's title, The Importance of Legal Due Process. What does due process look like? Well, let me share with you what it doesn't look like, and let's pertain to the case of Kilmar Garcia, who was deported to the Supermax prison in El Salvador. Number one, we have an individual who is never charged with a crime. Number two, he received a court ruling on 2019 that he could remain in the United States of America. 3, he was married to a U.S. citizen. 4, he was a union sheet metal worker, contributed to society. 5, he was grabbed, kidnapped, and arrested and sent to El Salvador to that Supermax prison. 6, he never had an opportunity to appear before a judge. He never had an opportunity to retain legal counsel, and he never had a chance to work on a pro se basis to defend himself. And last but not least, the most insulting perhaps, is that the Trump administration has been ordered by no less than 3 courts to facilitate his return, and their answer is, so sad, too bad, he's out of our control, and we can't do a thing about it. That's what the lack of due process looks like. And to discuss due process and the importance of due process, I'm here with my co-host, Jay Fidell, my special esteemed guest, Ben Davis, professor of law at the University of Toledo, and Chuck Crumpton, my special esteemed guest, lifetime attorney and mediator, and world traveler. Welcome, one and all. Hey, Jay, to you first. We have a federal judge in Missouri that says she's grown tired. She's lost her patience with the fact that the Trump administration can't facilitate the release of Kilmar Garcia. And not only is she fed up with it, but the Court of Appeals has weighed in, and the Supreme Court has weighed in. Just how important is due process, number one? And 2 is, what's your opinion about the fact that Trump is waving his nose or fingering his nose at all 3 courts?
I think you have to look at the larger picture when you talk about due process. Where does that come from anyway? It's in the Constitution. And due process is part of the Constitution, and therefore a violation of due process is therefore a constitutional crisis. And I think we have had so many indications that Trump is lawless. Bottom line is that Trump is testing on the Constitution all day long. I saw a very interesting bulwark this morning with Tim Miller and a fellow named Jonathan Rauch, who's a writer for The Atlantic. And they were talking about the fact that the constitutional crisis has been in place for a long time. We have had many incidences of it. And if you track back, you may not have thought at a given moment that what was happening was a constitutional crisis. But when you put them all together, it is absolutely a constitutional crisis. So my point to you, and for this discussion, is that when you talk about being lawless and ignoring and offending judges, you're talking about due process, but you're also talking about creating a constitutional crisis. And this is part of Trump's plan, his mission. And it's all about becoming a dictator and taking all that power. So that I would offer you as a starter point for what is going wrong on not only due process, but on a respect for law, the rule of law, and the Constitution.
Okay, thank you. Chuck, let's go back in time. Let's go back to February 19th, 1942, when President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 that basically incarcerated 120,000 United States citizens based on their ethnic characteristics, or the parents of these U.S. citizens. And they were detained in various parts in Texas, Arizona, and throughout the West, simply because there was a war going on with Japan, and they were of Japanese descent. Is Donald Trump trying to move back to these kind of days when it comes to those that are not citizens, but he wants to treat them as such and deport them without due process.
Well, it's not limited to one nationality in this situation. In fact, there's some question as to how big the category really is, and whether there are any groups of black and brown people other than those who are Trump's own minions that are not within and at risk. So Ben's the scholar in this group on this. I think going back to the history of the Fifth Amendment due process protection, and that it applies to any person, not limited by any characteristics or nationalities. Where does that take us, Ben?
You put me in a spot there. Okay, first of all,
Well, let me ask you this. Is there a difference between a citizen and constitutional provisions and protections versus a non-U.S. citizen? I don't know the immigration laws as well as I might or should, but it just seems to me that whether you're not whether you have U.S. citizenship status or not, you're entitled to due process before they deport you. I think that's the law, and I think that's why the Supreme Court and the appeals court have all cited on that part.
yeah. So here's the one difference between being a citizen and being a foreigner, okay?
Foreigner.
A foreigner, okay? Okay. Well, if you're a citizen, they can't deport you. If you're a foreigner, they can. I mean, it's just, now you might say they have rights. Oh, absolutely, they have rights. I will stipulate they have the same rights as person and all that stuff. But there's always a hook over the head of a foreigner, which is that the government can deport them, okay? Now, the reasons why the government can deport them can be a whole debate in itself. And there we go with due process on the deporting. But the point I'm just trying to make is that's the fundamental difference. And the sad thing is that whether you're documented or undocumented in this country right now, whether you are a legal permanent resident or a student visa holder or anything like that, meaning documented, they are going at you in ways that were completely not talked about before the election. Remember, in case this is bringing back ancient history, Trump talked about the really bad, violent, yada, yada, yada foreigners. Those ones that would be the ones that would be deported. He didn't talk about students at Columbia. He didn't talk about people married to their to Americans who were, law-abiding, wonderful people, pillars of their community. But what's happening now is that they want to get numbers, right? So they're going after the low-hanging fruit, right? They're going after and calling them all. My God, if MS-13 was as big a gang as they're saying it is, man, there would be millions in MS-13 at this point, Anyway.
Well, I'd just like to say for the record that if they're going after gang membership, they should be looking at the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and all those gangs.
Thank you. And if you find any foreigners among them, you can deport them. You can deport them, absolutely. But if they're citizens, they got
Ben, if you look at surveys and things, and there's been some survey taking lately, a majority of Americans supported getting out the bad criminals and deporting them. That was Those numbers were pretty strong, but those numbers are falling because it's the fact that they're being thrown out there without any due process, and people find that objectionable, particularly if someone has been mislabeled or misdiagnosed as a gang member, just because he may or may not have tattoos or whatever. There's a lot of Hawaiians that have tattoos. I'd be worried for them. So
the Secretary of Defense has got tattoos too.
That's
I'm just saying.
That's right. That's correct. So I guess the point is, it's almost like the first term when Trump was, trying to crack down on immigration, and the Zero Tolerance Act was literally taking children, babies, from the arms of mothers and fathers. And both Republicans and Democrats said that's a bridge too far for us. We do not support that. Are we there now with the lack of due process and deportation?
We are in such a bad place. I'm sorry that people use the term constitutional crisis. It's what it is, I think that we are in such a horrendous place, particularly since last night I was watching Chris Hayes, okay? And I heard that there are some people who were taken on those planes to El Salvador, and there's no record of where they are. And the government won't say who they are. So, we talk about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We know that guy. We know where he is, got his name and all that. There's some people, the family knows their name. They have been disappeared, and the government won't say where they are, and they're not on anybody's list. Now that is really disappeared, okay?
Well, what about
there,
the children?
man.
What about the children that were never returned to their parents after years?
Exactly. Yes, the 6,000 kids. The 6,000, I think it was, kids who are, God only knows what's happened to them. I mean, it's such a level of outdueling yourself in cruelty is what I think of. Who can be more cruel than the next person? Mm-hmm. And it's incumbent on us to hold these people accountable. I'm really happy. I'll just let you finish with this. Judge Boasberg, who had his decision basically ignored, and granted he lost jurisdiction on one part, but he said, but on that decision, when I made it, it was valid. And the rule is you have to comply with a order, even if subsequently it's overruled by a higher court. And he is going like white on rice with everybody in this organization saying, okay, who said it was okay to put these people on the plane, to send the plane, to take them off the plane, when I made an order said you can't do it? And that's what's going on right now. And he said there's probable cause of contempt. And he's going to go there because if he doesn't get the answer, he's going to say, okay, we got contempt here. All right. Now, Department of Justice, prosecute them. And of course, the Department of Justice will either say yes, and they won't do anything, or most likely they'll say no, in which case he can set up his own prosecutor. The judge can pick a person to be his own prosecutor, say, prosecute those dudes. That's where we're going. And
okay, so we don't have to depend on the Department of Justice and Pam Bondi for that.
No, the rule is that he can appoint somebody as sort of like a private prosecutor. And there's a Supreme Court decision, a case named Donziger, where that was considered totally valid. So there's Supreme Court precedent supporting that. And that's, right, I think, where we're going in the constitutional crisis, because there's three people. You can see who they are. You want to know who they are? I'll tell you who the people are. Okay. Stephen Miller. What's her name? Secretary Noem, who just lost her purse.
Christy
with all
Noem.
The secrets in it. And Pam Bondi. Those three. They did the okay. You can see it. It's obvious. They did it. Maybe a little bit of Rubio. Okay. But basically, you see how they acted when Bukala was there. And you're like, oh, I know who said it was okay. And I'm just waiting for them to be the subjects of this prosecution by the particular prosecutor that's named by the judge. Because Boasberg he's not letting it go. He's not letting it go. And that's what's kind of beautiful. I should add one thing. Judge Wilkinson, you remember what he said in his opinion, the Fourth Circuit opinion? That we have an intuitive sense as Americans of liberty, right? We all have this intuitive sense that this is like insane what they're doing. I thought it was beautiful the way he said, you're going to be able to stash people away in a foreign country where they can be tortured or killed, and you're not going to be able to do anything about it, and that's okay? It's like, that's insane. It's insane. So anyway, I'm sorry for going on.
Wasn't that the purpose of Guantanamo Bay?
Oh, well, you see, that's the other thing. Guantanamo was about, we're sending, remember, our good old friend Rumsfeld or Cheney, the worst of the worst, right? And then they had 752 people there. They ended up releasing how many? How about 736 who turned out to not be so bad? Okay, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, I'll stipulate. You know what I mean? But it's just putting a bunch of people in a place because you want to look tough, right? You want to look
Right.
tough. You want to look like, but these are not macho men and women, okay? These are punks. Excuse me to say it like that. They are wimps. They act like wimps. It's really, I'm so sorry for our country that we have a group of people at the top who do what are called performative toughness, and they're not. It really, it's just incredibly sad because it's really bad for the world.
Well, points well made there, Ben. Appreciate it. Jay, Ben mentioned that those who are here in the United States that are not citizens, but they're here on student visas and even residency, green cards, they're subject to maybe deportation as well. How serious do you think that is for those individuals? Should they be concerned? Should they now stop going to school because they're worried about being picked up on the street? Even those with residency cards, green cards, should they be concerned that showing up to work one day, the ICE may be waiting for them? Your thoughts? You're on mute, by the way.
Yes, 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 and yes. I just want to repeat what I said earlier, and to the extent that we have focused on some of this due process and deportation, the problem is much worse than that. We're talking about an administration and a president that is lawless. He is creating a constitutional crisis every single day. And these are only elements of that crisis. These are only elements of his lawlessness. Let me say, we should have known, we should have seen it coming when he took out a full-page ad in the New York Times about the Central Park Five. He's a racist, and he's looking for headlines, and he's looking to create outrage, and he's trying to connect with people who agree with that outrage. But let me go more current. The thing about the Supreme Court, they ruled on the Boasberg statement, I guess it was Boasberg, at 2:00 in the morning, because they wanted to make sure that he couldn't get away with it again, that Trump could not get away with it again. And if I didn't mention all of the people we're talking about, all of the bad acts we're talking about, it all comes from Trump. Remember, he's a micromanager. And, we can make fun of Kristi Noem and her lost purse and whatnot. But the fact is that all these people are loyalists, and they do what he wants them to do. They always get permission from him. They're pass-throughs, all of them. I mean, do you really think that Elon Musk is operating on his own? Not a chance. All that firing, he's going back to our deal leader. Trump has created this whole monster. Birthright citizenship, that's an absolute violation of the Constitution. Going for a third term, that's an absolute violation of the Constitution. Attacking the media with phony baloney cases, that's a total violation of the First Amendment. Going against law firms and the like, is likewise a violation of the First Amendment, right to counsel. His whole affair about Mar-a-Lago and stealing classified information when he was not in office, that's a complete violation. He's lawless, and he got away with it. I'm sorry to say. It's terrible. And one of his things that he does, and Jonathan Rauch talked about this, is the notion of distraction. We here have talked about Trump's technique of distracting on many, many, many occasions. We should not forget that. He does a bad act, he distracts from it, and then we are focused on the distraction instead of the bad act. He's been doing that a long time. That's exactly, by the way, what Viktor Orban does in Hungary. Mm-hmm. So all I'm saying is that this guy is going to continue to do what he's been doing, and he is emboldened by any success. And you can expect that all the things we've been talking about, all of the violations and the lawlessness, are going to continue and get worse. One thing that Rauch says, and I leave it for further discussion, is that the problem with the Democrats is they follow the distraction, and they don't focus on the worst ones, the ones that really count. And as far as Rauch is concerned, the one that is the best the best item to criticize is the corruption. And Lord knows there's plenty of that. But he distracts us from focusing on the corruption. Jonathan Rauch with Tim Miller on the Bulwark this morning, they said what you have to do is pick an issue and go after him every single day on that issue and not to be distracted. But all in all, I repeat my point before. So the whole thing about due process is a distraction. And in fact, he wants to offend us and excite us and give us outrage when what is really happening behind his back is a complete render of the U.S. Constitution.
Chuck, before this title came up, where we came up with this topic, the tag title was, "Is there an impeachment in the future?" I know that, the Democrats are not in charge of the House nor the Senate, but if this continues on the path that it is, or certainly when we really are face to face with a dire constitutional crisis, because the administration is ignoring the Supreme Court or may ignore the Supreme Court, would you expect some kind of drafting of articles of impeachment? And not that it's going to be approved, but at least the drafting of it. What do you think?
Well, yeah, and that's already been in the works, but it's not going to go anywhere. I mean, neither Johnson in the House nor Thune in the Senate would let it go anywhere. But doesn't it send a clear message to Americans that this is not tolerated? Not unless it comes from someone that has crossed the aisles mutual respect on both sides. Otherwise, it's going to just look like, okay, these guys are fighting back, but they don't have any bullets in their guns. So, do you see anyone on the Republican side crossing the aisle, particularly if there's complete disregard for a Supreme Court decision? No, probably the most honest Republican thing that's been said since Trump took office is Senator Murkowski's statement that, hey, we're all afraid. There are no limits. There are no guardrails. I mean, his appointed Secretary of the Interior has just appointed a Doge lackey to basically run the entire Department of the Interior, the lands, the parks, the waters. And in his campaign speech, he said, hey, those are our assets. That's how we get out of debt. Sell them off, lease them out. Okay, let me follow up with a different question here, and that is, can you tell Americans that are U.S. citizens why due process is so important, even if it's being extended to non-citizens? Why it's in their best interest that due process be preserved? Rights are choices. Human rights are human choices. Civil rights are human rights, whether it's a woman's reproductive choices in care, whether it's housing choices, whether it's employment choices, whether it's healthcare choices. All of those should be basic human rights. And they're now being attacked on a basis that is completely individually biased. Anyone that Trump sees as not 100% loyal and obedient to him is at risk. And if you get painted that way by somebody that is part of his legions, then you're at risk too. I think that misgivings that people will start to have on a broader basis, and the reason that there are thousands and thousands of people out there every 2 weeks, April 5th, April 19th, and probably again in May, is there are no limits or guardrails on who's at risk. I think that's a very succinct way of putting it, and I hope that people realize that immigrants that are being deported without due process is as much a concern for a U.S. citizen. Perhaps there's a U.S. citizen that protests that someone doesn't like. Oh, how convenient. How convenient to pick them up in front of their house and whisk them away, and no one knows where they're at for weeks, maybe even later. I mean, these are the stories of South America back in the 70s, Argentina, all these horrible places.
Thank you, Chuck. I appreciate that. Ben, right now I think it's Secretary of Defense and Kristi Noem that are talking to Donald Trump, or at least Stephen Miller and the like, about on the southern border instituting the Insurrection Act. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if they'll be successful in that, but doesn't it take a huge conflict, violent conflict, before the president can institute the Insurrection Act? Wouldn't it be convenient for him to do so, because then he could apply it to other areas of the country? Not that this has happened, but have you heard that rumor or seen those reports in the news, and what of it?
So the thing is that his first day as president, he did an executive order calling upon the people at DHS and DOD to do a report on the applicability of the Insurrection Act to the southern border, where he declared a southern border emergency. We're all in emergency space right now. And so on the 20th, good old Hegseth and Noem said, we don't see how this is going to be applicable at this point on the southern border, okay? And in the Washington weird kind of game, it's kind of like it's called, at least to me, it seems like it's what's called a non-denial denial, which means that if you saw the movie Wag the Dog, it's the kind of thing where the person says, there is no conflict between us and Albania, you know what I mean? And it's like, why are we talking about Albania all of a sudden, And then all of a sudden we're in war with Albania. Well, it's like, we're not going to use it on the southern border. Okay, well, why are we talking about using it at all? Because there's the rest of the country they're not talking about where they might use it. And that's the worry is using the military in the United States. And there have been occasions when it's happened. I remember when it happened in Newark, New Jersey in 1967, when there were riots in Newark, New Jersey. And we had, the troops coming down the street. And that was LBJ announced it then. But there are other occasions where that kind of thing is invoked. And the question with these people is it's being invoked by lawless people. I mean, already the kinds of guardrails we've been talking about, they've gotten rid of essentially the guardrails that require troops to be trained in the law of war. So if you get force drift, it's called as a term for all this. They just drift past and use more force than is necessary. So yes, it is definitely something that is on the radar screen of this administration to invoke at some point when it seems, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks before the election in 2026. Who knows? It absolutely, it's on their radar screen to invoke.
Okay. Jay, before we conclude and go to final thoughts, final comments, maybe I'll just throw out a couple statements of brightness in this bleak and dark topic. And that is a Colorado judge just put down an order that there has to be a 21-day notification to Venezuelans prior to deportation. That's one. Number two is at Fort Bliss in Texas, there were plans for thousands of beds and tents to be erected at Fort Bliss. Those plans have been scrapped. Now, I don't know if they've been scrapped because they're thinking there has to be due process before someone's incarcerated or temporarily incarcerated. I don't know the reason for scrapping those plans, but how do you view those two events?
Well, my view of this has kind of changed. When we last discussed the three branches of government, we said, well, the Congress is not effective now or in the foreseeable future under Trump. But we said the courts, we have to rely on the courts. We do rely on the courts. And yes, there are bright spots. There are judges who stand up for it. But, actually, I would say that in large part, see if the lawyers and law professors on the other end of this agree with me, we're in crisis. And the courts are not really organized to deal on an emergent basis. And of course, the Supreme Court is kind of missing in action. So I'm not sure that we can rely, although there are bright spots. I don't think we can rely on the courts to preserve our Constitution, to preserve the rule of law, and to deal with Trump's lawlessness. And that doesn't really answer, your thought about this cause for optimism here. But I would say that there's very little cause for optimism. He's working the courts. He's ignoring the courts with due regard for his plan to further ignore the courts going forward. He really does, to go to your question about impeachment, he really does need to be impeached. And we have to, make sure that Congress changes at the midterms, although that's a long shot. And we really have to try hard to attack him in the media and to make it clear that, there are lots of things, but let's focus on the ones that will bring him down. And that has happened in the past. Corruption has been a major source of overhaul for a corrupt president. And if you start thinking about all the corruption that he's involved in, it may be a good cause of action. But to answer your question, I'm not sure the courts are up to the job. Sorry.
Okay. I'll go to you for the last word, Jay. Let's go around the virtual table here. Ben, I'll start with you. Your final thoughts on this topic, and let it fly.
The main point is to fight back. So I really encourage everyone to just find a way to do something. I was actually very encouraged by Senator Van Hollen going down to El Salvador and saying, show me the body. I mean, it was basically a habeas action that he did. Mm-hmm. I want to see the body, except it wasn't in court. And so we could see the body of this guy, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Then you have, Senator Markey going down to Louisiana and saying, show me the body for, Remzi Ozturk and Mahmoud Khalil. So, you try to disappear these people into the darkness, and you have senators who, granted they can't get things through Congress, they are doing these performative acts of bringing light to the problems. I also think that these people who are going out every couple of weeks and demonstrating, they may think that it's not much, but it is really significant. Us old folks will remember how the Nixon White House would say, oh, we don't care about any of those demonstrations that are going on. And lo and behold, when you got the Nixon tapes and everything, that's what they were completely worried about. Similarly, Harvard doing its thing, saying, hell no, that's an important thing. I saw a thing today where there are 270 presidents of universities who basically come out against all this craziness that's there. All those things, you might not think that they are much, but I guarantee you they are something. And I think it stiffens the spines of judges. It stiffens the spines of a few people here and there. And mainly, those who try to inflict fear on us start to see that we're fearless, and that's scary for them.
Mm-hmm. Before I go to you, Chuck, Ben, or anyone here, did the U.S. Bar Association, have they written any letters, petitions, signatures, any of that taken place?
American Bar Association early on came out for the rule of law. American Society of International Law very early on came out with a statement. I mean, like I'm talking the first couple weeks, okay? Mm-hmm. And this one with the 270 different presidents of universities, that was assigned by the American Association of Law Schools. Then you're getting these faculty at schools, even state schools, as personal capacities are writing letters. For example, Ohio State, there's all the faculty there of the law school, as private citizens, whatever the school's going to do, they're making statements. So all of these things, it's a cumulative effect. Is all I can say. Just imagine if none of those things were going on.
Right.
Just imagine the silence, what it would be like, and how fast they would be moving on us.
Good point. Excellent point. Thank you very much for your perspective, Ben. Chuck, your perspective.
Ben and Jay and you have reminded us that while the Constitution does not allocate emergency powers to one branch, and until recently, they were distributed among executive, Congress, and the courts, depending on the situation. There's a flat out power grab to take all of the emergency power, because the emergency power is the excuse, as Ben has said, for Trump and his people to suspend all of the legal rights and protections, to take off all the guardrails. Whether the courts are going to be the one branch that enables and motivates people in society to come together to stand up against that is going to be the question.
Thank you very much, Chuck. Jay, as promised, the final word.
Well, my final word is pretty short. Ever feel like a frog? Ever feel like a frog in slowly heated water? I think that's where we are. And the water is heating up, and he is taking advantage of some very interesting manipulations. Distraction is one of those things, but he drills down on everything. And when he has lost a given battle, he backs off. He's got a response to every single stroke in this war against the country. So we're dealing with somebody who is pretty akamai about how to deal with whatever we can come up with. And regrettably, we don't have a Democratic Party that has coalesced, that has organized itself, and that's too bad. What we have is, these sua sponte, protests around the country that Rachel Maddow covers, and God bless her for her work. And we have some newscasters that continue to tell the truth. Although I most recently heard that the organizer, the producer for many decades of 60 Minutes, has now resigned under pressure of Redstone.
Yeah,
And Redstone, the owner of 60 Minutes, I guess, and there's this incipient merger, and she capitulated to that. So every time you hear a bright spot, you also hear these other stories of capitulation. And he's got a lot of power, and he knows now how to use that power. I would like to see the Democratic Party get it together. I would like to see more, street scenes. But I would be very careful about him bringing out the army and trying to do a Kent state on us. Bottom line is, I think we're in real trouble, and I think it's very important that we continue to have these discussions, and all the other media who are able, that they continue to have these discussions. But I feel the water is heating up.
Okay, thank you, Jay. I think the water's been heating up since 2016. It's just the burner's been turned up on high now. And for all those who are U.S. citizens of this country, please think that the issue that our immigrants who are non-citizens that are being denied due process really is your issue as well. So I know it's easy to say, well, that's not my problem, and go about your day. It is your problem, it's our problem, and it's serious. So with that, I'm Tim Apicella for American Issues Take One. Before we leave, I'd like to thank my esteemed guests, Ben Davis, Chuck Crumpton, and of course, my co-host, Jay Fidell. And until next week, aloha.